The great pumpkin debate. Yes, pumpkin demand is an actual thing. Now, maybe you're a bit like me and I said, what? Pumpkin demand is an actual thing. But we bring it in the expert Dean Crook here this morning, as well as Jeff Dickinson, to come in and talk about the great pumpkin debate. And we'll kind of share this with you right away. Pumpkin demand, it's a thing. And so, Dean, tell us about pumpkin demand. And it's a thing. And excuse my ignorance on this, because literally I can walk 2 kilometers in any direction, or what is it, like 1.2 miles in any direction, and there's like 10 farms that have just pumpkins at the end of the driveway. So when it comes to shipping pumpkins, I apologize for my ignorance. I'm assuming they get shipped, but we just seem to be like the pumpkin capital of the world here where I am, and probably not. Yeah. So it's like, I'm wondering, share with us, what is pumpkin demand?
Of course, Halloween, the big deal next week, right? So that's it's interesting. People are going to spend a record amount of money on costumes this year, something like $2 billion on costumes. Most adults are going to dress up as witches. Dogs are going to be dressed up as pumpkins, according to the NRF survey. I don't know how that's going to fly. But of course, pumpkins, we spent $400 on pumpkins here 3 weeks ago. They weren't big, but they were a variety of pumpkins.
Hold on. Say that again.
$400?
$400 my wife spent on pumpkins to decorate our yard.
Holy God.
Just your yard. Like, this isn't all the events she has scheduled.
I thought you were giving them away. Jeez.
First time I'd ever been out to buy pumpkins with her. And I said, do we really spend this much on pumpkins each year? And she said, absolutely. And
how about corn stalks and hay bales and stuff like that?
It's a little farm stand up the road. Like, so obviously they've got a pretty good markup because it's a low volume location. But when you look at pumpkins, I mean, a lot of pumpkins are grown regionally, Dan, like locally, probably around, there's a lot of farms that would grow small amounts, but the vast majority of pumpkins are grown in a town called Morton, Illinois. It's in the Bloomington freight market. And it's one of the reasons it's also located next to Nestle's Libby plant, which produces 85% of the world's canned pumpkin. So Morton, Illinois is kind of what they call the pumpkin capital of the world. But because they grow so many pumpkins to meet national demand, you see a lot of volume moving out of that particular freight market. And right on cue, spot rates, after dropping for the most part of the month, went up last week. Load posts were up about 12%, rates up 3 cents. You know, the national average is closer to $2 for reefer carriers, but out of Morton, Illinois, it's almost $3 a mile.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the loads went to Lakeland, Orlando, Miami. Those loads were paying carriers $2.83 and $2.90 a mile. So that's sort of what we're looking at, you know, when it comes to pumpkin demand. It's a refrigerated product. I don't think you see a lot of long distance because I think so much of the volume is grown in some of the areas, but that's what's happening this week. It's kind of a phenomenon, but I think the reason we talked about it on DAT's, you know, various networks is it's kind of signals the start of seasonality for refrigerated carriers. And this leads into next week, which is, if my math is right, almost 3 weeks out from Thanksgiving. And that's when fresh turkeys start moving out of the turkey belt, which will be Minnesota's the #1 state, closely followed by North Carolina. And that leads into Christmas tree shipping season, which all the trees have to be in parking lots by the Monday after, because we've got Black Friday. And then Cyber Monday. And then you've got Christmas tree sort of shipping that goes all the way through. And then you've got all the poultry and ham that has to move, you know, nationally. So it's what really sets refrigerated rates off, is really pumpkin season, because of the demand tightness that we see. That's not just pumpkins, but it's pumpkins, fresh turkeys, Christmas trees. And that's why you see freight markets like North Carolina in particular, which is the #1 state. I think it's the #1 and 2 for pork, pumpkin, sweet potato, and Christmas trees. And Minnesota is also right up there also. It's almost surprised that North Carolina grows so many Christmas trees, but they do. And of course, you'll see a lot come out of Quebec and Nova Scotia markets. So this is sort of, we've been talking about a fairly gloomy freight market for dry van carriers. And I don't know that there's much joy in that market other than a little bit of a lift that we see in our forecast. But refrigerated carriers are going to see a fairly significant lift. And I forgot to mention fall produce. So, if you think about fall produce out of the Pacific Northwest, upstate New York, you're going to see some tightness in capacity there. So again, the opportunities in, sort of what's left of October, November, and December are very regional for carriers. And you will see pockets of capacity tightness. Generally, across the board, looking at it nationally, capacity is still very loose when you look at all the averages. But in certain markets, you'll see it'll be hard to buy capacity if you're in the brokerage space. And I think that's going to largely because of, some seasonality. I don't know that it'll be off the charts seasonality because the overall market is still fairly depressed. But there will be a change in spot rates in the order of 10 to 15 cents a mile. Some markets, like out of the Pacific Northwest, out of the Yakima Valley, where they're producing a lot of apples and other fall produce, rates have still got 35 to 40 cents a mile to go before they peak at the end of the year. So some markets have got very strong upward rate movement, and I think that's where everyone has to watch. Is not the national average, it's the regional markets where you've got to be very careful. And I think that's probably where a lot of folks work, is regionally. I don't know anybody's working.
And most people don't understand when they are working regionally what actually happens in the regions they're working.
Right.
And, I look at some of these regions you're talking about, I'm thinking, well, if you start pulling reefer trucks into the reefer market, as opposed to probably right now doing a lot of dry van freight, that's gonna tighten up the dry van market as well, depending on the volume, obviously, and the amount of carriers. But if you look at your Illinois area, for all of these pumpkins, I can see that, Dean. I can see that tightening, and so let me ask you this: is this a positive sign, or is this just?
No, it's normal seasonal. It's a positive sign, and it's because of seasonality, right? So you do see an increase in demand this time of the year. We kind of talk about peak retail season. That's what's sort of being talked about as being very flat. But there's the other seasonality that goes on because we're still going to have parties. We're still going to have folks over for Thanksgiving. We're still going to buy presents, and we're still going to buy, fresh turkeys. So, but to your point, Dan, dry van capacity in that Pacific Northwest and Mountain Prairie region tightened last week, which you would say, well, how is that possible across that area? Well, fall produce and Christmas tree shipping season pulls those refrigerated trailers that were in the dry freight market into the reefer market because the rates are better. Yeah. And normally rates start to change. So dry van rates go up also. They were up 3 cents a mile last week in that whole Pacific Northwest, and they'll increase commensurate with refrigerated rates increasing. Dry van rates in the Pacific Northwest will go up about another 24 cents before the end of the year. So both dry van and reefer rates tighten, even though the capacity has been drawn to the refrigerated market. It's just you've got a fewer number of trucks available in both markets.
Got it.
Here in New Jersey, when it comes to pumpkins, you see a lot of flatbeds and gaylords filled with pumpkins on the super regional and regional deliveries. You can see them flying all over the place. And, when we grew up, we used to go to the farms and the pumpkins were still on the vines and you would cut them off yourself. Now they're laying them out in the fields all over the place, more than ever before. So it's interesting, it tightens up super regional and regional on the flatbeds, and that's where a lot of the tie-ups, that capacity goes.
Well, and this week maybe this is why flatbed capacity tightened really quickly last week in upstate New York across the Finger Lakes. It was bizarre, Jeff. We had a 66% increase in load posts, but spot rates out of that whole region across Rochester, Syracuse, all the way from Buffalo, all the way across to Albany, not massive freight markets, but rates in flatbed jumped 75 cents a mile in last week to $3.22 a mile as an average regional rate. Now, yes, a lot of that freight is regional freight, but they'd been dropping for 3 weeks prior. So you've got to really watch the markets regionally. I think that's the message that I like to convey, and you've sort of echoed that. That's where, and that's of course where you'll see the biggest impact on diesel prices and operating costs, because each region has very different operating costs.
Yes.
Diesel went up 10 cents a mile this week, driven mainly by increases in the Midwest, which is unusual, I think, because normally this time of the year we'll start to see stronger increases in the Northeast, because of a lot of refineries are going on maintenance, and we see the demand for heating oil start to increase.
Yeah, and something, you're talking about Southern California and apples and everything. They got a hurricane that's coming in there. I wonder what's going to happen to the crop in there. I mean, did you read that?
I did. Yeah, I saw the hurricane coming along the bottom of the Baja Peninsula. That's nuts.
Yeah. So I wonder how that's going to affect that area going into Southern California, Arizona, produce.
Well, it's been a pretty quiet hurricane season, hasn't it? Like, considering what we thought, kind of the whole. Well, meteorologists can be wrong every day and still keep their job. I think that's the only industry where they can do that. But we heard like, oh my God, it's starting early, and the hurricane season starting, and there's really only been like one major one that everybody kind of braced for. There's been a few other ones, but my question, Dean, goes back to when you were talking about regionally. So to help salespeople watching and listening, what are some of the ways reps can find regional data, like what ships out of where, when that seasonality is? Like, is there any place that you can? I mean, obviously, it takes a little bit of knowledge, it takes a little bit of understanding, it takes a little bit of depth and research. But is there any kind of quick view you can give anyone where you know what? Let me check the regionals areas that my customers are in, so I can get better acquainted with kind of these hills and valleys of regional.
So I just dropped in the chat a reference to the USDA website. It's a brilliant dashboard that they've built. Yeah. And you can go to the weekly refrigerated volume. There's a rate dashboard, and you can see the top 20 commodities. So if you want to share that, that is my go-to.
So I just posted that, everybody, to the chat. So whether you're on YouTube, this chat does not let me post to LinkedIn. So if you guys want, either head over to YouTube to Sales Chatter Live on YouTube and check that part of it out.
Well, you can also go to that analytics, and you can see all the hot spots, by mode as well. So you can really dig into the geographicality. So what's going on?
I just sent you a second report, Dan. It's the weekly truck rate report that comes from the USDA. They publish it every Tuesday, but it tells you I think this is probably more important for those that are buying capacity. It tells you about what regions are producing produce. There's normally about 20, and it tells you whether there's a surplus, a slight surplus, adequate, or a slight shortage, or shortage of trucks. And that will tell you about where your pricing needs to be. And when you go to each of those markets in the subsequent part of the report, it'll tell you what produce is moving and what the high range is for truckloads, for the full load of produce from. And they do it from 20 regions to 9 capital cities. That's how the rates are worked, right? So you can see Mexico from Nogales to Los Angeles is paying $900 to $1,200, cantaloupes, cucumbers, squash, etc. It's a really good report, generally up by probably Wednesday of each week at the USDA website. So they're the two that I go to mostly.
Okay, perfect. So what else we got on tap today, Dean, besides pumpkins?
Yeah, some data came out this week, which was somewhat good news, I think, for flatbed carriers. Single-family home starts were up. They came out, they're up a little bit. Nothing fantastic. I mean, they're up in the order of about 3.2% in September. I think it really surprised most of us. In contrast, building permits were down 1.8% month over month, which is, I think, a more telling data point, because permits for future building lead starts, and a start is literally digging a hole in the ground to build a new home. Permits lead starts in the order of 6 to 8 weeks. So if you said, what's flatbed demand look like for single family homes? Permits are a really good leading indicator. Why we look at single family homes is they're the most intensive from a freight perspective. They're very different than multifamily homes. But there is a boom in multifamily homes. We've got a residential housing crisis in the country. Higher interest rates mean that people that own existing homes aren't selling because they're holding on to their lower price mortgages, and it's creating a real shortage of homes. But we're also seeing, not a fantastic number of new homes being built because of the price of, people buying, having to get new mortgages. And I think the data point, Jason Miller had a really good point this morning about it. And he kind of said it was good and bad news. And he really said it depends on the I think it's the Federal Organizing Market Committee that works part of the Fed. They're the ones that determine which interest rates go. He said if interest rates stay higher for longer, last month's single-family home starts may be the upper bound for housing activity through 2024. So I'm expecting housing starts to come back down a bit. I think this may have been a little bit of a blip. But he said once until we start seeing 30-year mortgage rates start to come down, there's a real sense that the single-family housing market will be very tepid, which is that's what drove the flatbed market. When you look at flatbed rates, single-family housing starts, and single-family permits, it's like a 0.90 positive correlation. Like the two tracked each other since not 2019. There's a very strong correlation. So if you said, how does the flatbed market improve? Single-family housing starts are going to be the ones that will be the best indicator to watch. But right now, they're very, very flat.
So we've had, it's interesting that you went to this point. And so when I was in BC last week, I was talking to a few people, and one of them was telling me about how many projects, housing projects, houses being built, subdivisions being built, that have literally been put just stagnant, on hold, forget about it. And some developers have walked away because of the much higher cost to hold all the property before it sells. The cost of, and it's just more in BC, it's more property and holding the costs because of interest rates going up. We have a couple of subdivisions going in around here. Appears to be like everything is stopped, like they cleared the areas for all the homes, and then there's been pipe sitting there for 2.5 months, hasn't moved, which is all like the sewers and everything. And I don't know if I've been asking around to see if I can find somebody close to that to find out what the reasons are for that, because like our interest rates in Canada have skyrocketed for homes, right? And that there was talk about, well, the reason it is because we don't want foreign buyers to come in and buy all the real estate because it doesn't leave homes for Canadians and all this kind of stuff. I don't necessarily know what the meat and potatoes of it is, to be completely transparent, but all I know is in my area alone, and like for all of you that don't understand, like I live in a small town where there's one zip code, one postal code, that's it. So you guys probably where you are, people 4 blocks away have a different zip code than you. But we literally, it's one postal code. There's like one main street, and there's 4 subdivisions of over 700 plus homes per subdivision going in around us, where there's zero work on all 4. Zero work. So tells me something's happening.
I was at a truck show on the weekend, right? We were at the Trucks for Charity show in Wallingford, Connecticut. So we had a lot of carriers come in from New York State, Connecticut. Connecticut's home to triaxle dump trucks. I don't know if you guys were aware of that. It's a useless data point that probably doesn't help anybody, but us truckers, it's the home of the coolest triaxle dump trucks in the country. And so they really specialize in having some pretty fancy dump trucks. So I got talking to a couple of guys that are in that space. The host of it was Matty Hazelwood, who owns Hazelwood Excavations. They've been around since 1950. And he said, we are flat out. We are flat out building multifamily homes. Flat out. Can't build enough. We said, we've got 2-year projects, for multifamily homes, just building so many because people can't get mortgages to, enough. They don't have enough money to buy a new home because the prices are so high. The mortgage rates would be so high. So there's obviously more demand for rental properties. And then I talked to another guy who's got some triaxle trucks in New York, quad axle trucks in New York, like live bottom 4 trailers for asphalt and dump trailers for gravel and sand. He said revenue's down about 30% this year. And then and it was really strange. The guy parked next to him was one of those big furniture home relocation trucks with the massive sleepers where the drivers live in them.
Yep.
And Roman had been in the business 38 years, and he said, it's really, really quiet. I'm dropping my furniture trailer for a lowboy next week and hauling machinery. And I said, so why is it quiet? And he said, nobody's moving. Interest rates are so high, nobody's selling their homes and nobody's moving, and the furniture industry is really, really quiet. And I never put that together. So in the space of just talking to three trucks, three carriers, I got a really good sense of what's going on in the market, and it's affecting everybody in different ways.
Yes.
Some are busy, some aren't. It's just like, open deck freight has been really soft in the last year, but specialized heavy haulage carriers have been really busy doing machinery moves for all of the commercial warehousing that's been built. And that'll start, of course, that'll slow down. So there's winners and losers in this economy still, on the trucking side of it, but it's still a very difficult market to navigate if you're not watching exactly what's going on and understanding the macroeconomics.
Yeah, well, we've got, and I'm not sure who this is, the LinkedIn user. It says because of the
I
Supreme
was
Court.
just reading it.
Yeah, environmental impact on assessment by the Liberals. So it's somebody in Canada that also took duty to consult on natural resource groups with Indigenous communities, many factors being weighted on. It's also due to lack of labor or shortage of trades. Also, new players coming to the game who are offering private mortgages directly to cut out banks. It happened recently in Texas with a community that can house 200,000 plus people. I do see, in speaking with a few people, a huge uptick in people not going to the bank anymore, going to private money to borrow.
Right.
And I've seen that. One friend in particular completely cut out the banks completely, like 3 months ago when they started to really, and he says, it's cheaper for me to go private. He says, because like I can pay it back when I want, like there's no penalty. There's, he goes, like if I go and get a new mortgage, I'm locked in for 25 years when I got to take 5 years at this huge rate. And then if, in those 5 years, I make a couple of moves and I want to put $500,000 down on my mortgage, I get penalized for it. Whereas if you borrow privately, you can throw $500,000 down and you're not penalized for paying that back. Right. So it's kind of like that. Back 15 years ago, the big thing was get your mortgage to a point where you can get a line of credit on it. Right. Where like, you open up a line of credit and you pay off your mortgage and then you just kind of pay the line of credit instead of your mortgage. Right. So there's all these different aspects happening. I didn't realize about the property in the Indigenous communities and those kind of factors, which I probably should have figured that out considering.
That's a great comment. It's a great.
Yeah, well, it's where the land's coming from, right?
Right.
Oh yeah.
Like I remember sitting down with Damon and a bunch of different carriers with counselor of Delta, BC, and because they're having a big conversation right now about truck parking. Like in BC, it's horrible for truck parking, just horrible. And this was the big thing: is like, if it's private land and somebody owns it, they're going to want to make a profit off of it. Whereas the city can say, we own this land. We're going to turn it into a parking lot on the side of the highway for truck drivers to pull over and have a good night's sleep. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's all these factors that are coming in. And we've recently, I've started to get in a lot deeper with our local snowmobile club.
Yep.
And it's actually amazing how much property around us is owned by individuals. So it's farmland, but a farmer doesn't own it. A business owns it. And I was like, really? And it just, you immediately see 100 acres of farmland and there's like hay growing. You just assume it's a farmer that owns it. Right. And I guess that's probably the ignorance, but we have now been in contact and in conversations with companies to get access through these properties for our snowmobile trails.
Oh.
Companies that own them, or one individual that owns like 15 different pieces of land. And in asking the questions, I'm like, well, why do you own that? He says, I bought it years ago, knowing there'd be development. So they kind of pre-purchase it. And he goes, and now when developers come to me, I purchased this for $1 million, 15 years ago. Now it's worth 30. I sat on it. Sure, I've paid the mortgage on it, but it's just land. You can get tax write-offs and all this kind of stuff. And now these developers are coming in and they're saying, yeah, sure, we'll sell it. It's
We
a
have a lot
pretty
of
good deal.
yeah, we have a lot of prime land over here that the state bought from farmers, and it's land preservation. You can't build on it for 25, 30 years and even more. And you're talking about in areas that people want to move to, that they want to build there and they can't. They can't put a foundation and they can't build anything. You know, the only thing that you can do is you can rip down a home and build it up on the original foundation. You can't put it in another location. So
you actually see a lot of that happening too. Damon was telling me that when I was in BC. He says a lot of the times it's the location they want. And so they'll rip a home down and put a new home up. They'd literally just buy it for the property. And, you know, I mean, there's that too, but, you know, that, you know, I guess,
if you want to buy a farm and still farm it, that's okay, but you can't build on it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're getting close on time here, but can I play my crack record again?
Yes, go for it.
About spot rates bottoming out?
Yes. No. So let me ask you a question, Dean. If spot rates bottomed out.
Oh, God, yeah, lay it on. So good news. They have moved up a little bit this week or last week. So the national average did move up last week. I sort of looked at the 3-day average and there was definitely upward pressure. But
thought I'd never hear that.
They did move up. No surprise in refrigerated, right? Because of the seasonality. Dry van rates did, it certainly bottomed out and went up. Flatbed still dropping. So that's still a very soft market. But 1 week doesn't make a trend. But seasonality, I think if it stays where it's at, in terms of demand, we'll start to see rates move up a little bit. But I think my blog next week is really saying that I think a lot of this will be short-lived, because once we get to January, I think the wheels fall off again. I think
you know that. I mean, because you're not going to have a return season, and that's gonna you know, make it very difficult as well. There's not going to be any boom. Boom.
And we're still having capacity exit the industry. Demand is still going to be very soft. So the first quarter next year is going to be really, really tough, I think, for a lot of us. Obviously, the bottom of the freight market is when you see brokers under the most compression, like margin compression. Carriers have got the most margin compression. This is the bottom of this freight cycle, and it really hurts. We've seen some big brokerages go out of business in the last week. This is a really tough freight market right now. And I mean, it's a bad freight market, but we're at the bottom of it right now. What we don't know is how long it lasts. Normally, you'd say that, you know, this peak season will be really good, you know, in typical years. Not so this year, because we've still got a lot of capacity in the market.
So, Dean, can we maybe make that next week's show, talk about these digital freight brokerages and kind of what was the downfall? Because I got my own opinions on it, and I'd love to see where the data sits and where that sits. I always saw digital freight brokerage as kind of like always operating at the bottom of the barrel. It was only for cheap freight. And do you want to get it moved the cheapest? Do you want to kind of obviously helping owner operators that were in those areas find for, you know what I mean? And the concept is great, but I always just felt like it was never really a relationship. Maybe it was a relationship beginner where you can kind of like start a relationship, but you know what I mean? And I know we gotta end off in 2 minutes or so. So I don't necessarily, I don't think it's appropriate or, you know, value to the audience to getting into it right now, but maybe we can put that on tap for next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. It kind of ends before it starts. But think about it. You know?
Yeah. And ending before it starts. It's like, I'm still blown away that you and your wife spent $400 on pumpkins, Dean.
Well, I was blown away. I had to do all the lifting and the wheeling of the cart around.
Where do you live, Dean? I'm going to stop by and steal a few.
Manchester by the Sea. We're at the end of 128, which is off 95 North.
Holy cow. I'll give you my address, man. You know, stop by with Grumpy Pete and drop a few off, will you?
Yeah, that's it. Cheapers.
Yeah, I still got sticker shock from that deal, because I'm going to throw them out in a week's time into the backyard as they'll be rotten.
Compost,
for the deer.
I hope you gutted them all, so at least you can have the pumpkin seeds from them.
Yeah, they'll be composting. I'll look after
You'll
them
be doing
properly.
that
You're
too.
going to have
All
a
right.
tremendous amount of pumpkins in your backyard. You won't have to buy them anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I didn't think about
Plant
that.
them. You can do your own sales of pumpkins and let other people spend $400 off your front lawn to get
Just
pumpkins.
nuts.
Did you hear?
But
Dean
until
Tyler,
next
he's
time.
selling pumpkins.
That's it. We'll advertise it on the show a couple of weeks before and everything. All right, gentlemen, we'll see you guys next
Okay,
week. To all
thanks.
you watching and listening, take the data, go to those 2 websites. If you haven't seen them, head over to YouTube. Make sure you subscribe while you're there, and grab those 2 links and really start understanding and learning what's going on in your regional industries and what products are coming out, what commodities ship at what time, and what it will do to impact your sales. Until tomorrow.